Um, Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to thank everyone here this morning, for joining us. It's been a wonderful week. We are very excited with everything that has happened. We are particularly grateful to students and participants and to our wonderful facilitators. It's been awesome. I feel like we are definitely energized and inspired for the semester and beyond. So I just wanted to thank everyone. And I also wanted to welcome our dean, Todd Jokel. He's been following the action, and today he was able to come in and participate and be here with us. So Todd, we love to have you here, and you're welcome.
Well, thank you very much. For what it's worth, I'll keep it brief because I think as Kim is describing, there's really amazing horsepower in the room with these four panelists and alumni. So we want to get to them very quickly. But welcome to the final panel presentation of Connecting the Dots. I want to welcome students, alumni, faculty, and we have participants from around the world joining as well. My name is Todd Jokel, as Alex had said, and I'm the Dean of the College of Art and Design. Very proud to and honored to have this position. I also would like to thank Beth for her interpreter services today. Beth, I apologize, I don't know your last name, but thank you very much for your contributions. Obviously, the program Connecting the Dots is produced and organized by the Interior Design Program in RIT's College of Art and Design and School of Design. RIT's College of Art and Design is actually comprised of nearly 2,000 students and 140 faculty. And I don't know actually the number of alumni, active alumni we have, but I should look that up. It's certainly numbering in the many thousands. Through the work of our faculty, our students, and our alumni, we've really established ourselves as a unique and distinguished institution in the areas of art and design, not only in America, but around the world. As the name of this week's program suggests, I think we have a unique ability to connect the dots in the College of Art and Design at RIT. Due to the fact that we're situated at the center of RIT's universe, both physically, we are really at the center of our Henrietta campus, as well as more strategically and metaphorically with RIT's mission of being the nexus of technology, art, and design. No other center point than the College of Art and Design resides in that location, that locus. This triumvirate of technology, art, and design really creates a variety of experiences and a culture that promotes not only convergent thinking, but also divergent thinking and application of design. And I think we'll see that in today's panel discussion. Today, as I mentioned before, is a culminating event, and I'm really grateful and pleased to welcome our distinguished panelists. And so first, let me thank the panelists for joining us during this week. And again, today, I've heard a lot about your contributions so far, and I've had an opportunity to meet one of you and Patty in person. The others, Joey, Jeff, and Paul. I look forward to getting a chance to having individual conversations with you, either via remote or in person at some point in the hopefully not too distant future. Before introducing the panelists, I would like to just say a quick thank you to some of the team that helped to organize this. This is a collection of faculty, leaders, staff, and students who have been very engaged in this, and with Alex Lobos, Laura Goulart, Bruce Leonard, Dave Avensky, Amos Scully, Stan Rickel, let's see, Ali Tracy, Jihoon Yu, and Tom Roberti. Oh, there's also a few others here. Well, the Dean's office has been marginally involved, but certainly communication and marketing team at RIT, and then the College of Art and Design in particular. Thank you all for your support and leadership in making this happen. Each of the four panelists has credentials that are exemplary, and I know that in the invitation and confirmation documents that everyone was emailed, there's more of a biography of each of those. So I won't list the numerous accomplishments, as we'd never get to them. And ultimately, this conversation is what we're here for. However, a quick word for each is really called for. First, we have Patty Moore, a 1974 graduate. Patty epitomizes convergent and divergent design as a founder of the concept of inclusive design and design for all. She is the president of MooreDesign Associates, and of course is a very distinguished 2019 National Design Award winner. So welcome, Patty, and thank you for joining us. Joey Zeledon is a 2006 graduate. He's been a leading designer at the most recognizable companies in the world, as well as creative startups that he's helped to breathe life into their concepts and ideas as well. He is the head of industrial design at HP and a principal at Joey Zeledon Studio. Paul McGee, in addition to hearing he and Patty's interest and love for automobiles and everything that's mechanical, is a leader in human-centric design. Paul is the director of industrial design at Crown Equipment. And certainly, he's also a 1993 graduate, my apologies. And Jeff Smith is also a 1993 graduate. He is a cloud adoption specialist at Autodesk, and Jeff has been the creator of products we have all used, ranging from fitness to watercraft and everything in between. So with that, I'll say thank you to this panel discussion. I look forward to listening and participating in this discussion. And I'll turn it back over to Alex and to Kim to get this kicked off. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you for all the support. And yeah, Kim, the panel is all yours, so please be kind with them.
Well, I might have a little bit of fun with them, but no, all good. So back to the superpowers thing, and that's only a little bit facetious. I think all of our students are relieved when they're coming out of high school and they finally decide what it is they want to do when they grow up, what they want to be when they grow up. And then there's this dismay that sort of sets in sometime during those 4 years when they realize they've got to do it all again, because the field of industrial design is so broad with so many directions that you can go in. And I think one of the real challenges a lot of times is for them to figure out what it is they have to offer. And frequently, when I look at them, it's pretty obvious. For them, it's tough to know what it is that they have that stands out above the rest, or at least not necessarily makes them better, but sets them apart. And I'm wondering what it is you sort of see as your superpower that sets you apart, that allowed you to rise above some of those that were around you in organizations and to accomplish things that other people haven't. And what is that superpower for you, and what is it that sets you apart? And what is it that, when was it you discovered that, and how have you leveraged that? So, yeah, and I'll let whoever wants to start with that jump right in. Oh, let me just add this. One of the ways that one of the little tricks I've had with students to help them figure out what that is, because everybody has sort of been brought up not to brag, not to boast about what you're good at. So I say, well, if you look around at your classmates, what have you noticed that they're just not quite as good at? You're a little surprised they're not doing well. So what is it that has surprised you that allowed you to sort of figure out your path, your career path? All right, so this is where everybody gets modest all of a sudden. I don't really have any.
All right, Kim, I'll talk. Okay. So I'll answer it quickly. And if you would have asked me after college and first couple years, I would have said this was my weakest point. And now, if I look back retrospectively, I would say networking. And at that time, I would have told you I was terrible at it. But now, looking back, who you know, who you meet, putting dots together and knowing who to collaborate with, and you never know where that connection's going to come from, whether it's above you, behind you, next to you. Like that genuine connection level is so important.
When did you discover that? Did that happen in school? Were you out a few years, or did it just happen like last month?
I discovered it about 6.5 years ago during the process where I had a very rough patch in my career, and I thought I had networked poorly. And then as I started to reach out to my network, I realized that I had, in fact, networked pretty adequately. So it was, at a low point, and you were like, looking back, yeah, okay. I thought that was bad, but I was actually doing okay.
Great, cool.
Well, I'll take it next if I may, and I'll be more long-winded than that, unfortunately, or fortunately.
That may be your superpower.
It might be. I'm going to say I think the thing I do best is observe. And there wasn't a Thanksgiving holiday that passed in our home without my father recounting a story of when I was 2-ish, 3-ish. He had me by the hand in the butcher's. Sorry for all my vegan friends. And I was standing next to Daddy, and I was analyzing the way the meat counter was laid out. And I was, telling him I was a little dismayed by where, the hot dogs were next to the hamburgers, next to the pork chops, next to the chickens. And my dad loves the part where he would smile and say, and then this lady said, "Who's talking?" And she looked down at you and she said, "Is she talking?" And my father said, "Yes," confused. And she kept repeating, "She's talking." And my dad said in that moment, he realized, as I was his firstborn, he didn't know I was unusual, but that I began talking at 10 months. My first word was clock, and I never shut up. But that the one thing that I talked about all the time, which he enjoyed, was I was always telling him what I was seeing, what I was observing, and asking lots of questions. And not just why, but why not? And I think all of that has defined my career. My mother would tell the tale that she was very concerned. My parents were very concerned when I became old enough to get an allowance for doing chores around the house. I immediately would take that money, that nickel, whatever it was, and run to the corner store and buy candy for my sisters. And one day they took me aside and said, "That's your money. You're supposed to be spending it, for yourself." And my parents evidently looked ashamed when I said, "Well, I am. I'm buying things for my sisters." And I think that really does define me. I have been greatly blessed in this career, and I give a lot of money away. All of my speaking fees, as an example, I think I shared this with our conversation Monday afternoon. I add them up at the end of the year, then I double them and I give them to a charity. And that gives me tremendous pleasure. I don't need money to be happy, and I'm so delighted my life has shown that to be true.
So that's you actually took what you sort of established in the butcher shop, and you took that and leveraged that into a career where you observe more than most people, and then you talk about it more than most people. That is sort of your career, isn't it?
Evidently, and I didn't know I was a design mind until I got an award for it. So I found that pretty amusing, actually. No, I get paid to talk, and I say this to the students primarily. That's a good thing for design. Instead of us being at a table in a corporation, in a meeting, and having the other participants rolling their eyes, "Oh, here comes design," which is where the attitude was when I started in the 70s, to today, where people are excited to see you enter the room because they know the meeting's going to be something about creativity, innovation, tipping points, stealing cheese, all those lovely euphemistic business books that we feel pressured to read. Our best work comes from the fact that we see things in a very unique way. And that's what makes us so instrumental for innovation and change.
Just your answer and Jeff's answer is actually a little bit encouraging to me, because it is a real challenge to get students to sort of identify what it is that they're good at and what they have to offer. And that's so important when you're trying to set out on your initial career path. But you two, I mean, you didn't know you had a design mind until somebody gave you an award for it. And Jeff has just sort of finally found his way 6 years ago. It's really pretty remarkable.
Well, sir, we're slow. We're from Buffalo. We like to take our time.
Yes. Yeah. So, Paul, superpowers.
I don't know that I would describe them as that. That might be a little heavy a word choice for anything, but I think It was probably what was underlying in a lot of my conversation yesterday, and we talked with Anthony and some other folks afterwards in the afternoon, where I think for me it was the ability to show the value of design beyond just the things that were kind of stereotypically expected of design, and it was also the ability to frame design to non-designers in a way to make them understand that it wasn't just making things pretty, and it wasn't just a human factors or economic exercise. It was a good for business practice. And so I think being able to champion design to non-designers, I guess if I were to put it in a succinct thought, was one of the things that I think I've done fairly well.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things I realized after being in the industry for a while, that so much of what we do is educating the client about what design is, educating the client about why this is a good idea. Yeah, that's huge. It goes back to sort of that storytelling is getting that sense across.
To that point, Kim, I mean, I don't want to presume for others, but in pretty much every place I've ever been, especially when when I first got in there, it's a lot of that I think is just grounded in listening to your own designers, listening to the staff of designers, and you often hear them kind of commiserating and frustrated because, in a sense, they always feel misunderstood.
Yes.
And I don't think it's that it's not that people don't understand them, but I feel like there's always that frustration in designers that their ideas aren't being manifested the way they'd like them to be, or the company doesn't, X or Y or Z or whatever it may be. And so it became clear to me that I could see the way my peers and other designers were frustrated with how they were viewed, but I could also be very empathetic to the people that were frustrated with design in many cases, or didn't understand design. And it just felt like my opportunity there was to help bridge and help the organization, but also more importantly, help design.
Yeah. Cool. Great. Joey.
Yeah, I think my superpower, well, I think when I was studying at RIT, it was without a doubt, being able to sketch well. I could always draw, it was something I really excelled at. So, at that time it was my superpower was a hard skill, which was helpful, and it's a way designers communicate. But I'm happy to be able to say that it's not really my leading superpower anymore. And I don't know if it really ever was. I think for me, it's always been, how I frame things or reframe things and a little bit of that storytelling and kind of using creative writing and, capturing leading stories, and creating an appropriate hierarchy of design elements. Is something that I really love to do, and I think I excel at. I think I had an intuition of being able to do that when I was studying at RIT, but I wasn't really aware of it, and didn't really know. Maybe wasn't able to really articulate, it in what I was doing, because I wasn't aware of like the design process and kind of, it's interesting when you unpack intuition, kind of the value that's inherently there. So I think for me, I'm happy to be able to reflect on kind of the evolution of superpower, right? From when I was at RIT to where I am now. And yeah, it's super interesting to think about.
Yeah, let's talk about the sketching for just a minute. How much sketching do you do in the course of a week or a day? Are you sketching every day?
Very little, to be honest. Now I just design PowerPoint slides, and I mean, I'm kind of a conduit, between designers and business folks.
So the sketching has sort of taken a back seat to how you frame things, how you frame problems, how you view problems.
Yeah, and in a way, it is still sketching, right? It depends on how you define sketching, because I guess it's like designing conversations, which still needs a hierarchy. It still needs a leading story. It's still, if you unpack what makes great sketching, it's really the same principles as a great conversation.
Yeah, I would sort of sketching. Obviously, your sketching is awesome, but I think your perception on things is also important, because I remember as a student how you would reframe the problems in ways that just didn't seem right. It was like you weren't even trying to fit in with the rest of the children.
Right.
It was. I love this story, and I'm sorry, Joey, I'm going to tell it every time we're having a conversation. But one of my studio classes, the prompt was to design it was fans, okay? But instead of calling it a fan, I said, we're going to develop a cooling system. Well, of course, at the time, Joey was all about shoes. So his cooling system was a shoe. Everybody else has these fans and elevated fans that would hover over an accident scene or something like that for the EMTs. And Joey had a shoe. And then there's the shoe that was, the prompt was, I don't know if you came up with the prompt, somebody else did, but it was vegetables. So the mashup was vegetables and shoes. And it was just with awesome results. So let's take that to the next step. As we know from the Marvel Comics series, every superhero has their Achilles heel. What is the big thing? And I think for all of you, one of your greatest strengths is you're constantly learning, constantly observing, taking things in, redirecting how you think, how you approach design. What are the things that you still that you see your biggest things to work on at this point? What are the areas that you're trying to improve? Paul, you're going to go first because that was a big smile.
I was just trying to determine how much time you had. Honestly, I think there's still moments that I think in a professional setting that I wish I could keep my emotions maybe more in check on certain things. I look at Joey, for example, and I think Joey's got this great demeanor. I haven't really gotten a chance to know him very well, but I think sometimes the same thing that's an asset is a liability, right? Like it's great to be passionate about things, but that can come at a price, right? And so I think that's there's times that I tend to trust my gut and go with my impulses, but that's not always necessarily the smartest thing in certain settings, right? I think that's probably the thing. There's a ton to learn, but I think that's probably the you have to make those decisions about what matters most to you. Is it about ascendancy, or is it about being true to yourself and finding that balance? But I think that's kind of the perpetual battle.
Yeah. Now, truth be told, when Joey loses it, it is off the wall. No, I've never seen Joey lose it. Never seen him.
Well, I'm kind of curious now.
No, that was nice of you to say, Paul. But actually, that's a good segue into, maybe one of my Achilles heel, which is, I'm a very introverted person, a proud introvert. But with that kind of personality comes, strengths and weaknesses. And I think, one of the strengths of introversion, and I don't know if you are, but, it's being able to kind of get lost in yourself for hours on end, days on end, and being completely content with it. And that's when I, get excited. That's where my passion comes out. Whereas I think the downside of it is, I've always struggled in meetings and important meetings to make sure my, I'm heard and my authority comes across. So I think that's something that I've always found challenging, and had to find other ways to make sure I'm heard, and to make sure, I do my power poses before any presentation.
So I'll answer as well. So like Paul, I would say that I'm way too quick to spout off something. On one hand, it is a positive because you're always throwing out ideas. On the negative side, some people get intimidated by that. And what I would say is, what I take away from it is I'm trying to build on that with patience, right? I try and really balance listening and speaking, because I tend to, like Paul, I just jump. I'm like, if I've got an idea, I'll tell you, let's do it. Or here's an idea, but I'm trying really hard to be patient, right? And not always be the first one to speak. Because I have a theory that says the first one to speak gets no credit. It's the third person, right? Because I believe the first time you hear an idea, you react one way. And when you hear it a second time, you remember. And then the third time you hear an idea, that's the one that sticks with you. So I'm trying to shoot for number 3.
What's the phrase, Jeff? The early bird may get the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese.
Yep. Trying.
Wait, I got to write that down.
That's pretty good.
Okay, well, I'm battling the sun. I feel like a vampire at dawn or something here, but I remember speaking at an IDSA conference in Seattle years and years ago, and Victor Papanek was there too. And in fact, that's the first time we met. And we were backstage, and when I came off stage, he was waiting for me, and he was in tears, and he knelt down in front of me and held my hand and thanked me. It's very emotional to remember this moment. And he said to me, don't listen to people who tell you to stop. And that's actually been the only thing that I've struggled with, if I'm answering the question the way you were hoping, Kim. I have to constantly remind myself to choose my battles wisely. I have to always remember there's just so much to be done right now. There always has been, and there always will be. And there's only so much one person can do, which is why I think I've always delighted in putting teams together. I'm a wedding planner. I love putting that perfect team together. I think I referenced, Mr. Phelps and his black and white photos in the TV version of Mission Impossible. That's where I delight. And that's what I love about this era of design, being that it is more and more possible to be international because we're all working remotely thanks to technology. So I'm as happy as I've ever been working now because of how we can work. This part I don't like very much because I am a in the moment kind of person, and I'm in-person person. So I miss being with people. This solitary confinement has not been good for me. I haven't been on a plane since February 12th last year. Today I get my first jab. And my doctor is standing by with epinephrine because I'm probably going to have a reaction because I'm allergic to polysorbate. So this could get really exciting. Check CNN later today, people. But I don't say that with any morbidity. If today's my last day, I'm delighted because of what we're doing right now. And that's what I always try to do, is just stay in the moment, stay focused. But admittedly, that's hard for me because I'm always thinking about what Paul just said and what I remember from something that happened before and how it might impact what we do in the future. I'm always just bouncing around in terms of organizing, that chart, and doing my Excel layout. And I've just always been like that. And I do insinuate myself into other people's business, but I've always thought that's what we're supposed to be doing. I remember, and again, sadly to drift, but one of the vice presidents of I think it was interior architecture doesn't really matter at Lowy, came to me one day holding a clipping from the New York Times that I had put on his desk earlier in the morning. And he said, "Are you the one who's, giving these articles to people?" And I said, "Yes." And I thought, oh, I've done something wrong again, which never really bothered me. But, I tried to act contrite. And he said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Well, because you're working on that project. And I thought this would be interesting. And he said, yeah, but why are you doing this? And I thought, wow, are architects that selfish? That they don't cross cultures? And I remember thinking how odd it was that someone was surprised somebody was just trying to do something nice or helpful or kind. So I am that much of a Pollyanna, that I'm always surprised when people are cruel, when people are unkind, when people are unjust. But I'm always then thinking, what can I do about that situation? That's why I get up every morning.
Can I add one more? I just want to add one more Achilles heel that's more hard-skilled related, just to ground my more existential answer before, which is CAD.
You were just sitting there introverting, weren't you, Joey?
Yeah. No, and this isn't to say, I'm not giving any of the students on here an excuse to not improve their CAD, but I was never good at CAD. And I improved here and there along my career path, but I always found a way around it, right? I think the lesson there for me is, and I'm still practicing my CAD. I'm trying to improve. I bet some of your students are even better at CAD than I am. But there's always a way around it. And I think that's important, especially in the professional world, is knowing what you're good at and what you struggle at, and then finding those who are good at what you aren't good at and collaborating, right? And I think that's what makes it that in and of itself is a really important skill.
Joey, if I may,
yeah.
I've never done any CAD. And now it's like when I proudly say I've never had an Oreo, and yes, I never saw Star Wars. Okay, I want that on my tombstone, because I take that as, it's not just an icebreaker in a meeting now where the whole room goes, what? How can you be an industrial designer and you've never seen Star Wars? Because I am a Captain Kirk girl and I'm very loyal. That's why. And I mean that quite seriously. But to your point about the CAD, I draw, and I remember you as a student. I remember your brilliance on paper, and I love drawing. And I also do origami because that brings it to the 3-dimensional, and I'm always inventing, folded solutions. But I also feel, why should I deprive someone of income? So I hire people who do great CAD, and I think that's also part of who I am. I'd rather build that team and give the money to somebody else than struggle with something I really don't want to know. I can barely use this stupid phone because it's so irritating, and I'm still missing my BlackBerry. So I'm slow to change.
All right. Thanks. Those all great responses. I think what's really great about these conversations, I think the students get to see how important the human connection in this whole process is. It's in so many ways more important than a lot of the technical skills. Not the CAD's not important, kids. But a lot of times that is your foot in the door. I mean, sometimes you will get hired because of your sketching, your CAD skills, but they keep you, they promote you because of the so-called soft skills. And in all of those, and I think Joey sort of alluded to this, is in a lot of respects, at every point in the product development process, from early research right through to how the thing gets packaged, it's all complex problem solving. It's creative problem solving. It's dealing whether you're solving a CAD problem, sketching problem, manufacturing problem, and personnel problem, all complex problem solving. But some of the common themes I've heard from all of you in your talks was the importance of communication. And within that, digging a little deeper, it's empathy and candor. Empathy in understanding the other person's point of view, what the problem is as they frame it, what they're trying to solve, what is their key objectives. And then candor is being able to communicate clearly. In a lot of ways, it's communicating an inconvenient truth, something that trying to redirect their frame of reference or their point of view to something that will help ensure success. So I think the question for you is, for each of you, how do you achieve empathy? How do you get to the point where you understand that other person's point of view well enough that you can state it back to them and they say, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. And then the flip side, when you're trying to share your point of view, communicate candidly what you think needs to happen, or what they would benefit from. How do you communicate that? How do you get across something that maybe they don't want to hear? So first thing, how do you gain an understanding of where they're coming from? And then how do you help them redirect their train of thinking?
Well, I can jump in.
And while there's a really long, pregnant pause there, let me tell all the other students that I also am an introvert. As you can see, I'm in remission. So I get on a roll, but I want you to, this is your chance to practice being assertive and jump right in there. Just say the word question, or I don't have my chat open. So yeah, you're going to just have to speak up. So let's hear from the folks, and then if your students have anything they pressing questions they'd like to get across here, just jump right in. Oh, what's the key to success?
Well, I don't know if I'd say it's a key to success, but it's at least something. I think, Jeff talked about it from his own personal development perspective, and I think what he said is actually a great answer to this question, which is, you have to start by asking, you start a conversation by asking more questions than you do make statements. If you want to understand somebody, you got to use your ears more than your mouth. And so I think that's key. Most people's desire is just to be heard and understood. And, that goes back to a large part of my conversation yesterday, which is if you want your ideas to go forward, you need to not just start spewing or espousing what you believe to be true without understanding the viewpoints of others before you begin that conversation. And you can reframe what you may think in language that they would better understand. So, for example, one of the things that I think my team never understood when I would enter a conversation, I think they thought I was a little bit annoying, and it's a bit of a Latin throwback, right? Like Crown is, if I could be very general, Crown is a very Germanic company. It's literally like when I moved in there, they were very proud of the fact that that was an area that was German immigrant farmers, and they would actually espouse that proudly in meetings. And here comes somebody whose parents emigrated from Italy, or pardon me, whose grandparents emigrated from Italy, and we're talkers and we like to be social before we like to do business. And so I would bring this practice into meetings and just start asking people questions that had nothing to do with the work or nothing to do with the project. And I think people initially found that annoying, but then as the day went on and as the conversation went on, you had a very different rapport with that person. And I would use those casual conversations to get a better understanding about them and what motivated them and what inspired them. But you're also creating a different dynamic between you and that person. Whereas if you just immediately go in on a topic, if you agree, great. But if you don't agree, you're just starting at a point of disagreement. You're not starting at a point of commiseration or interpersonal dialogue. So to me, I think that's the key to starting to understand others, is just to listen and talk and engage. And sometimes that means not about the thing that you think you should be talking about. I think the way to convert people to understand your point of view is, again, part of what I talked about, which is to the degree that you can deal in data or deal in things that are not personal or belief-centric in nature. Or if it is things that are belief-centric, I think you can often create some disassociation or deal with different stakeholders that might be more important than you or the person you're debating with. So for example, if I've got a designer that wants something done a certain way, I think I gave an example about him wanting color in a certain place on one of the platforms we were working on, and he just wanted it that way. And the engineers did not want it that way. And I said, but you can't make it about what you want versus what they want. If you state the benefit of this feature to the person operating the truck, all of a sudden, this isn't about you versus them. This is about a better experience for the person on the truck. And all of a sudden, that completely reframes the tension in the conversation. So I think it's about making it not a personal or contentious dialogue. That would be my input.
You know, that's very interesting because you start with the personal connection. I think that's, you don't want to have a conversation just with an engineer. You want to have a conversation with the person. But then you take the subjectivity out of it by saying you're communicating with logic and a rationale behind the thinking.
If I could just offer one example of that. Sorry, Jeff. One example of that was on one of the projects that we were doing that was a very ergonomically precise project. It was basically an armrest for one of the trucks with very, very meticulous controls. And the engineer was a very high quality engineer, and my designer was a very high quality guy, but they were oil and water. They were not a good fit. They worked together very well for about the first 6 months, but after that, things started to derail pretty badly, and it was really having a negative effect on the project. And so my designer came to me and asked, he's asking tactical questions about, well, this guy doesn't want to do X, Y, and Z. And he was very frustrated. And he said, what do you think I ought to do? I said, I think you should take him to lunch. And he was very confused by that. And I said, you guys should go to lunch and you should not talk about the project. You should ask him about his kids and how baseball is going and develop a relationship with them. And 2 weeks later, he came back to me and said that it completely changed the nature of their experience with one another.
That's interesting to hear you say that, because that's one of the things I'm telling students as they're going out into the world, making connections and networking. That scary term that we think of only people, guys in business suits are doing. It's really just making personal connections. And I use the dating analogy a lot. And I think Patty used that when she talked about some of the meetings she goes, it's like dating. It really is so much about that personal connection.
I just want to make a quick.
Oh, go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
A quick comparison to this idea of lateral connection making or lateral relationship building. That you're talking about, Paul. Right? You don't keep like kind of ramming it forward to try to get what you want. Right? You kind of do a sidestep or take a couple steps back to move forward. And I think it's the same thought process, the same approach in idea development and ideation, right? It's really the same idea where you do these and look at analogous paths around the main path.
I was going to say, Paul, I hear Tony Soprano saying, it's not personal, it's business. It's a line from The Godfather. It's been around a long time. And I never liked that because that's wrong. It is personal. That's why the person is upset by what you're saying, upset by what you did. And because we live in a world of hierarchies, if you're the lowest person on that totem pole, then that's why it hurts. And it does go back to, and why I love the poem, What I Learned in Kindergarten, because it goes from our earliest socializations outside of our family when we enter a classroom. And teachers talk about this all the time. They can tell you who their introverts are, who their extroverts are, who's on the fence, who's going to be trouble, who's going to be a joy. They already are painting pictures based on the deportment of a little child in preschool. And there's science behind it as well. My point in all this is when I enter a room of strangers, which is typically how I work since I'm a consultant, I am not entering unprepared. I've done as much homework as I can. I've read everyone's bio. And even before we had, Google it, I found out by asking questions of other people who knew that client, who's who and what's what. I think I mentioned the other day, Loie set the scene every time a client came in for a meeting. The corporate color was predominant. We found out, whether they were a tea or a coffee drinker, everything they could possibly ask for, hopefully was there so that the presentation would go well. This is getting ridiculous. The thing I like to share with students particularly is, okay, you're going to be the new kid in the classroom. You're going to be, the kid starting out once you graduate and you go into your first work setting. And as such, don't walk in terrified and waiting to see what unfolds. Make what unfolds part of your agenda. Be prepared for that. And know that sometimes, it's okay to bring a plate of chocolate chip cookies. There's not a better warm up for a room full of men that I've learned over the years. And I've been at this a while. And make sure you have some that don't have nuts. Just be aware that people want to always be seen as who they are. The what they are is actually secondary. So when you don't respect someone's presence, things are going to go wrong. So I say it's key always, just make friends, be kind, be nice, be interested in other people. Like Paul just said, ask about the kids, ask, Jeff about the bills. Hopefully Monday morning, he's not at the bottom of the pool. And, just, oh, that's where I'm going to be. Sorry, I got confused there for a minute. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that's a little trick of the trade. I love being self-effacing, and I love teasing someone I know who can take the teasing, because you're building the team. And if you walk in as two people with that client, learn how you're going to play off each other, practice, rehearse how you're going to present, what you're going to say, who's going to be, the easy part of it, who's going to be the tough part of it, who's going to hold feet to the fire, who's going to say, wait a second, maybe we could look at what Paul said. He's not as stupid as he looks. You don't say those things out loud, but you do them through your actions. And that's what makes this so much fun. As we're creating, we're also creating the culture. We're not just creating things. And we're changing the world, literally and figuratively, every time we introduce a new innovation.
So I'm going to digest what everyone said and use you all as an example. So the first thing, as Paul said, is listening. The second thing is your attitude. So in a meeting, you should be staying away from, no, not that, this. You should be using yes, because I hear you, and, right? So you're always building. So to Paul's point, yes, and when you're in a meeting, right, you're never going to change someone with a stick, right? That's not the way to do it. If nothing else has taught me that being in the business world, you have to lead people to a self-realization that your idea is actually their idea. That's how you get things done. You have to put crumbs out there and you put the carrot out there, and then they come to the realization that, oh, this is it. Great. Good job. That's a good idea, when it was really your idea. Sometimes it's not about you. It's about getting it done. And then, so to Patty's comment about hierarchy, right? There is a thing that is also called training your boss. So how do you train your boss to be a better boss, right? And that if you can understand how your actions can help your boss or steer your boss, that's a way to get recognized. That's a way to think bigger than you and think at different scales, from you to your boss, to their boss, to company. You can put those together. You can steer the things that everyone's talking about here.
So you're talking about figuring out what your boss needs, what his or her goals are, and then figuring out how to make your boss look good?
Yes, and how to make you look good so it's easy for your boss to talk about you, right? So you're getting your check marks, you're helping them get their check marks, and you're helping their boss's boss get their check marks, right? So analyze the structure and how you can create wins for everyone.
And I want to point out to everybody right there that you just disagreed with me, but you started out with yes, and
I'm trying to drink my Kool-Aid.
No, but it's a really important skill to build. It's active listening. And the learning comes from recognizing we're not going to move from this point unless everybody in the room believes that they're equal. And so it is, first impressions are everything. If that kickoff meeting was miserable because everybody went to their individual corners and nobody felt they were heard and nobody felt like they left the meeting with a direction, that's the fault of somebody not to get everybody to hold hands and play nice. And it really is, it's like, first date, you want it to go well, so you get a second date. Same thing in any kind of interaction. So everybody should be getting to really know each other, understand each other, and yes, like each other. You can't work with unlike people. So we have to like each other. It doesn't mean emotionally, it means consciously, head, heart, in tandem.
And to build on Patty's point there, don't sit with your team. Use the dinner strategy, motif. Split up and sit with other people. You're going to sit by your people you like. Split up. Infiltrate. Sorry, did I say that out loud, that I'm going to work in and help people? No, sorry. Infiltrate other teams. Get with them.
Yeah, Patty, you keep bringing up these sort of kindergarten metaphors, get together, hold hands. But at first it sounds kind of childish and trite. But what you're really talking about is getting back to fundamentals, and I think that's what Paul is talking about. Also, is if you just focus on the manufacturing of this thing, just like I use as an analogy, if I tell students, if you just focus on designing a particular product, you're going to fail every time. You need to look at it as a product user system. If you're not including the user in the equation, if you're going to fail. And just as if you're in a meeting with manufacturing, if you're not considering the person that's there and not just the engineer, it doesn't necessarily bode well for a successful outcome.
And there's nothing childish about Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel, Mr. Man. This is biblical in parable strength. And so, as I say, this is a book actually I buy by the dozens, and I often bring it as an icebreaker to meetings, especially if I know our challenge of the day is to look at how are we going to shift from one technology to another technology. I know Paul and I come from very similar backgrounds in terms of how we've seen technology change. Joey, I love the other day when we were talking about the traditional versus what comes from design. So how did we get to be OXO after everybody in the world has this in their kitchen utility drawer, rusting away, hurting themselves? And you might have noticed I have a rotary phone behind me. That actually is a working phone in my house. So, and I do it deliberately because I don't see it as history. I see it as the shoulders we're standing on, the cornerstones we build on. And when I'm teaching, of course, I'm showing students things like this horrible little durable medical piece of equipment that you stick onto that rotary phone that has braille and numbers that are larger for people who are starting to lose vision. That's how we make fundamental change. But in a corporate setting where you make a certain thing and now the design team comes in and says, well, we're going to tweak it a little bit. We're going to make it better. And everybody's sitting there like, no, you're not playing with my baby. You're not touching my baby. That's why we have to be good at all of this. That's why we have to be the nicest person in the room.
Hey, Tim, I don't think I answered the question. I think I'm the last one, right? So what was the question?
Well, it started out, well, it may have evolved here a little bit, but it started out with empathy and candor.
Right.
And how do you go about getting your brain wrapped around the other person's point of view?
Yeah.
And then And then how do you encourage them to wrap their brain around your point of view?
Right. So yeah, no, that's right. So I think the others covered most of the things really well. I think maybe the only area that I think I can add to is the thing that Paul was talking about, taking someone out to lunch, kind of, going around, sort of flanking the problem to get to the solution, relationship building. I think for me, what's helped me throughout my career is the idea of managing up, managing down, managing across, those hierarchies. And also just, in that, thinking about management in that sense, right? And everyone then is a manager, right? Maybe not formally or officially or by how much you get paid, but you have to think in those terms. And because in each of those relationships and in each of those conversations, the dynamic is different, the need is different, the relationship is different. And so for me, I think, that's something where I've always really thrived at, is having one-to-one conversations. I think the thing that I've always had to work at figuring out how to do really well, because it didn't come natural to me, was the performance side, which is when you're not in a one-to-one, but you're in a presentation, you're in a group dynamic, you're hosting, you're running a workshop. That's a very different dynamic than the one-to-one. And what I've always tried to do, and gaining alignment and creating, building relationships and creating alliances, and getting people behind my ideas, right, is kind of going after both approaches, right? Figuring out how to perform, how to do performance innovation, in those workshops and orchestrating all of that. And then, but afterwards, I always made it a point to have those one-on-one conversations, right? Before and after, if I could, with my boss, with, my direct colleagues, with, interns, because I think you're really able to show your true self that way. And I think people really, that's where the connection, I think, really is made, right? As opposed to on the chess set where you're doing the performance, which is a whole other thing.
Very good. We're going to segue slightly into job satisfaction. I think for a lot of students, first step obviously is figuring out what it is they have to offer, what they want to do. Next step is how do you find the company that does that? And I think for a lot of students, that focuses on who's designing the products that I want to do, and then they'll write up their cover letter. I want to come and work for your company. And you when you really don't know that much about the company necessarily. But I think also a flip side of that is who's doing what you want, but what is it like to work there? What are the people like to work there? And I don't think that's necessarily given as much importance. I tell students that your resume, your cover letter, the interview, portfolio, all of that stuff for a potential employer is really just to answer 3 questions. What the employer wants to know is, do you want the job? Can you do the job? And can I work with you? And I would ask, let's start with that. Which of those 3 things, when you're looking to hire somebody, which of those 3 things are most important? Or is that an unfair question?
No, I would say none of them, because I don't think that holds true anymore. I really don't. And I'm not saying that to be difficult. I think the hardest interview I ever had was trying to get into Columbia University to study gerontology. I didn't have any science prerequisites. I wasn't a nurse. I wasn't a social worker. And I had to sit in front of the dean and make my case why an industrial designer deserved a slot in this program. And I remember I talked as hard as I've ever talked, and I sold as hard as I've ever sold. And he had to sign off on me, and he finally did. And I remember the moment when he sort of sat back in his chair and smiled, and he said, "So now I know what an industrial designer is." I leaned in and said, "No, you don't," because I'm not I'm not really a traditional industrial designer, but that's also why I'm here. Now, that was back in 1980, and we just take it for granted now that industrial designers are going to get a master's in gerontology or a master's in psychology and move on to a PhD perhaps. That's become the norm. And I don't think we should worry so much about going to a company and asking for a job. I think we should be training students to just go out into the world and pick a subject, pick a topic, pick a focus that moves them, and see how can you fit the designer into that structure. Because I think more and more the jobs that need us the most are not the jobs for which people are hiring. I think you have to present yourself to World Health. I think you have to present yourself to the government. I think you have to present yourself to a not-for-profit and be that rich, insightful person in an area that never used design or doesn't even know what it is.
That actually is a good segue into one of the other areas of interest, and that's the importance of redefining the problem in all aspects, from the job search right through to getting a product to market. Paul, you had mentioned that yesterday, that a lot of times the problems that people are trying to solve or how they frame it isn't correct. I would actually argue that it's never correct. If they actually knew exactly what the problem was, they'd know exactly what the solution is. So much of it is really about how to define the problem. But Patty, that just takes such faith in oneself to go into some place you had no place going because you didn't have the qualifications. So often, and I think particularly for women, if they don't have 100% of the qualifications for a job, they won't apply. Whereas men frequently have a high level of confidence for no apparent reason. If they've got 25% of the qualifications, they'll say, yeah, I can do that. How is it that you got to that point where you said, they said this is the problem. You've got to meet these criteria. And you said, well, I don't like that because I can't achieve that. So I'll just redefine the problem and go in and tell him he's asking the wrong questions. How do you get to that point? What was the thought process that got you there? Or was that little girl in the butcher shop already doing that?
Well, it's what got me into RIT too. I was 17 and I was coming out of a Sister of Mercy all-girl academy, and I never drafted anything. So all of my fellow students in the freshman year, they'd all drafted, they had all had shop. I was the standalone, but I didn't find that frightening. I just remember my initial meeting, and I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name. He's legendary at RIT. I'll get it later and I'll send it to you. But I remember him smiling in such a sweet, kind, accepting way as I was babbling on and showing him my drawings and my watercolors. I remember I had a watercolor of a fish. I just love fishing, so I did this, never mind. But yeah, that's what my portfolio was to get into RIT. I didn't have any of the prerequisites for RIT. I had a 4.0. I lived in Buffalo. I think he had a soft spot for Buffalo. I think he might have been a Buffalonian. And I think he just got a kick out of the fact that this kid was there with her steelworker father arguing that she should be accepted into RIT.
How much of your success comes from people seeing that you have a belief in yourself?
Oh, I wouldn't know that because that's the other person's perspective. When I come into meetings today, I can tell you, well, when we were still having meetings, I love hearing whispers and murmurs and groans as I'm walking down a hallway and headed for the conference room, because I'll hear things like, oh shit, Patty Moore's here. And it means that they know that we're going to be talking about equity, and we're going to be talking about these global issues, and we're going to be talking about all this stuff. And they're like, we just make tractors. Who brought her in here? But that's exactly why I get hired, because it looks like I don't know what I'm talking about, or I have absolutely no reason to be there because there's nothing like that in my experience and my background. But that's exactly why we should be in the room. I think we have to sell our designers to the world and to the potential of career paths in a much different way than we're currently doing. This is something I've been talking to the faculty about for years, of course, and now Todd. We do have to look at this as a completely different generation of opportunity, because it's not, if we look at the problems of the world, we're not going to get out of bed. We have to look at the opportunities. I really do believe we have to bolster all of our positive thoughts, because there's plenty of negative to go around.
I think we have a deeper connection now as well, because both my mother and godmother are Sister Mercy alumni.
Oh yeah, honey, believe me. I know I make the girls very nervous because, you know, I'm not exactly what we would call devout.
Yes, so yeah, there's an even tighter connection. If I can, you know, it is quite funny how that works out. You never know where it's coming from. I would say, if I can build on that a little bit, I'd like to just take a slightly different experiential point of view. Everything Patty's talking about, or what Kim's talking about, I would say shift that slightly to your second or third job, because that first year when you're out working will eclipse the 4 years of college and what you grow and learn. So to me, out of college, it's JOB, right? I want to learn on someone else's dime now and learn from them and collaborate with them. Once you've taken that in and you've seen how much you've grown in a year or 2 or 3, then you will have a greater success percentage to target the company you want, the product you want. Getting into government, we need more industrial designers in public office. Yes. So whatever that becomes, right? I think that experience, like putting that under your belt, goes a long way.
I'd kind of compliment what Jeff is saying. I wouldn't dispute what Patty's saying at all, of course. I do think that one of the things that is critical is to be able to, or one of the things that will at least make less friction, or friction that doesn't need to be there, is to establish your own credibility in a given conversation. Mm-hmm. It's not always just, again, I think, you know, one of the points I was trying to make is it's not about the value of your idea. It's about in many cases, it's about your ability to appear credible in what it is you're saying. You know, too many times I know we had great ideas that were either before their time or were not accepted with the level of credibility that they hope, you know, maybe should have been. And in some cases that was because we didn't do the right thing. In other cases, it was because we didn't build the right bridges to be viewed credibly in the given conversation. Yeah. So I think, like, you know, this is early for a lot of you, but, you know, it's funny, what Patty was talking about is actually an experience we're going through in our house right now. Actually, Kim, you know, your comment about, you know, my wife's point of view about looking for jobs versus me. It's like, I think I literally used your phrase this morning with my wife. She continuously undersells her competency. And, but I share that because, you know, as your career goes forward, like Jeff says, even at the most elemental levels, it's not that you're not expected to contribute right away, but nobody is expecting you in most settings to change the world in the first 6 months of your job. They're expecting you to show competency. And then after 6 months, and these numbers aren't precise, but, you know, as an example, when I started the job at Crown, I was given very specific direction. Like, nobody wants to see anything changed in a wholesale way for the first 6 months you're here. They just don't. Mm-hmm. And I think what you'll often find is that is time that they expect you to be doing what we talked about earlier, which is spending more time listening and absorbing than you are. If you come in on day one and tell everybody that the machine is broken, you're not speaking from what they perceive as a position of credibility or of true understanding.
You haven't listened first.
You haven't perceivably listened first. Now, you might have done 1,000 hours of homework. You might have done everything, But that becomes more about how you're perceived and consumed, whether you think you're right or wrong.
You had mentioned something in your talk, Paul, about back to the question of do you want the job? Can you do the job? And can I work with you? To you, which one of those holds more weight? Or is there another set of criteria you would use?
I don't know that those are the exact same words that we might use, but if I were to, but I don't think that's really off at all. I referenced a story about people that were technically good, but not the best, but that we took people that we knew thought correctly and were easier to collaborate with others over people that were maybe a higher technical competency. We will always hire people that we can work with and that can produce value. And like when Joey was talking about the things that he was technically good and not good at, you know, I might not be as worried about, like if Joey says I'm introverted and I don't want to be in meetings, I'm not really like if Joey was just getting out of school, like I don't know that I would be worried about him being an introvert or an extrovert. It would be, does he have a way to communicate with me the ideas in his head effectively? And is he easy to work with or talk through? But if he came in and just drew stuff and said, no, here it is, this is the thing, go make this thing. I don't want that. I don't care how pretty his sketches would be if he's just myopic about it. I've got a pretty evenly split team of people that are pretty polar in their introversion and extroversion, and they're all valuable, just in different ways.
Yeah, Joey's thinking, yeah, Crown, I could work there.
No, I think, yeah, kind of continuing on what Paul is talking about. So for me, my hard skill, my ability to sketch, that opened up a lot of doors, easily. But I think, also personality, right? That's huge. And I think getting along with people and being teachable and growing, having growth potential. For me, when I look to hire someone, or grow our team, the first thing is certainly, I would say the most important thing is personality, is chemistry, right? And that's going to be, because I think a lot of things you can learn on the job, and if there's enough potential there, on the hard skills, like that can be learned easily, and I think for me, I came in, I got my foot in the door through sketching, and, because I wasn't, let's say an asshole, I'm sure that helped. But then I learned, how to break out of my shell.
Everybody should write that one down, Joey.
And I, while others coming in maybe need to work on their sketching, I had to work on my presentation skills, my opening up, getting out of my head. And I was able to learn that, right? So everyone comes in at a different starting point, and comes in with a different strength. And the idea is to expand and go and first starting out, there's so many facets to get better at. And, but the trick is to figure out how to get in, how to get your foot in the door. I think that's a challenge, always the most challenging.
For each of you, what was the, as you move from academia into the professional world, what was the biggest transition or surprise or biggest thing you needed to learn the first 6 months or year on the job? What was the thing you didn't learn in school that you learned on the job or only could learn on the job?
I think just to, it just popped into my head, but I think, going with the sketching narrative here, this idea that it's it's not about pretty sketches anymore. It's about the MVP of sketch, right? The minimum viable sketch. What's going to be the quickest thing to communicate the idea, to move things forward, and that's it. So all of the students out there thinking, the Instagram sketching, that whole story. I mean, it's just a separate thing. This, when you're on the job, that doesn't matter. And I think, I remember very clearly when I first started out, my first job, I worked at Clark's Shoes in Boston, and I would spend it was so inefficient, countless hours just drawing shoes and getting lost into, you know, the beautification of the sketch, you know. And I remember my boss would just like, he was like, what are you doing sitting here just polishing this thing? It's, you know, like, go bring it to the engineer, go make this happen, you know, send the email or just do other things. And it was like, I was like, oh yeah, right.
So all this stuff in school about you got to sketch well, work on your sketch and work on your sketch. And you get out there on the job and the guy says, don't sketch so well, Joey.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, it was you know, fidelity with intent, right?
Meaning, it was, you know, to basically do the job of the sketch and then stop.
Correct.
Once you've got a sketch that does the job, stop. Paul, you smiled when I said, what did you learn first 6 months on the job?
Well, I was just laughing because it's the phrase that I think Jeff and I use a lot, and so I'll give the generic phrase and then give some examples. But it's basically not knowing how the sausage gets made, right? And what I mean by that is a lot of we're talking about it in a lot of nuanced ways today, which is just basically you learn things at a foundational level, even how things get made and all that. It you know, in university, but I don't think there's a lot of the things that I was talking about in my conversation, which is the things aren't always going to make sense. The reasons why things get done or don't get done, they're not always logical. They're not always ground in facts or data or even money. And what's interesting is having a team of people that's all over the experience spectrum. It's kind of very interesting to watch them go through these different phases of kind of picking up on that and seeing how they respond or pivot to those that knowledge. And we get some people that come in, like the one young man that I referenced the other day, watching him go through it, and you could kind of see the day the light bulbs would go off, and he kind of, you know, it's kind of like getting punched in a way. And, you know, you kind of see him shake his head. He's like, oh, okay, this is how it is. And he pivots very quickly. I've got a gentleman who's probably close to a senior staff designer who's been in the working world for 7 years. And he still resists the fact that this is reality. Like every conversation with him is like, well, no, that doesn't make sense. It should just be this. And it's like, that's not the way this works. That is not the way this works. You need to acknowledge that, you know, decisions get made for reasons that don't make logical sense. And he's kind of just resistant. He's high valued and we like him, but, you know, to be frank, and I share this, you know, none of the students that are on the call, this isn't in their imminent future, but the conversations we have is about his ability. Like, he'll always be valuable. We'll keep him on staff for sure, but that is a behavior that would limit our viewing him as an advanceable person. Like, okay, that basically makes us start to think, well, unless that behavior changes, his growth is done. He will be a staff designer until he views it differently. So I think those are the things that, you know, I think you kind of get a sense for it when you're in university, but I don't think you really appreciate it until you see it unfolding in front of you in a job.
Yeah. Jeff, I'll expand the question for you just a little bit to what did you learn on the job, or you could answer the analogous question. What do you see new hires? What are the trials and tribulations they need to go through? What do they need to learn? Or you're a little surprised they're a little bit slow on the uptake sometimes.
Well, my answer is to answer both of those, because it's my perception and I think it's still relevant. So to me, the most important thing that you learn those 6 months to a year is pace. Pace. The pace is so different, right? For example, if you're in school.
Wait. Everybody is asking faster or slower, faster or slower.
Oh God, faster, right? So the pace, like if you're in school and you have a week and they say, oh, come back with 30 concepts next week. You know that experience. You know what it's like to stare at the page and not get anywhere. Oh, you get up and go do something else for an hour and a half and come back and put one concept down. Generating those 30 concepts over 1 week, you have room for error and you have a safety net, right? When you're in a job and you're there and your job is to generate those concepts, there is no safety net there, right? And you learn over those 3 to 6 months how to turn the idea light switch on, right? And when you're a student, it's like you're fumbling across the bedroom with the light out, trying to find it and you stub your toe. When you're the professional, you learn how to walk through the dark and turn the light switch on. And that pace, that like, you just churn it out, right? And pace is the most, and everything, and it applies to everything. I'm just using concepting as the one element.
Now, the flip side of that, you're bringing down the whole room here, Jeff. The flip side of that is, instead of working 6 hours a week in a studio class, or if you're working outside, maybe 12 hours a week, it's 40 hours a week, and it doesn't stop. It's drinking from a fire hose. The whole thing about, sketch every day so you can get better at it, you don't really have a choice anymore. You will get better at it because you're going to be doing a lot of it. How was that for your experience coming out? Was that you came out of school sketching like a bandit? So what was your steep learning curve?
I would challenge it. The sketching is the technical side, right? The conceptual generation is the hard part, right? Oh yeah, I could draw whatever I wanted to draw, but it's got to be relative to what the thing is, right? Like how to find ways to come up with concepts. And I've said this times in drawing, sketching workshops. I don't know if everyone's heard it, but there's a lot of times I use a simple trick, right? I'll do a couple concepts that work out, and I've left myself a space on the page. And by that last concept, all I'm doing is I'll just draw something to fit this negative space here. And you don't know what that's going to generate. You have to find ways to make you think of different concepts or ideas, right? And little tricks like that come to you. Like the last one on my page is usually something that I had no idea what it was going to be. And I just filled in the space. So,
Kim, I know that there are some questions from the audience, so I don't know if you want to jump to that. If you move to gallery view, I think you'll be able to see people that have their hand raised.
Yeah, I do have a question. I just didn't want it to be rude and interrupt the conversation because it was actually pretty good.
It's called assertive.
No, okay. No, yeah, thank you guys for being here. This conversation is being super insightful. My question is about if there is any project you did along your career and it was a turning point for you in understanding a specific thing that you keep along in your career. And if yes, if this project exists, what it is and what it changed for you in terms of even getting jobs or where you should focus your attention on your career.
May I take that? I was on the creation of the first full body tomography system for then Pfizer Medical Systems, and Lowy stole someone from Dreyfus, and we became fast friends. Chuck Morrow, Dr. Charles Morrow. A couple of things happened with that project. I think most important for me was Chuck was going to medical school at the time, and he encouraged me to do the same thing. So I'm really glad that I had that mentoring, because that definitely changed the scope of who I am and who I get to be in a meeting. Sometimes I'm a designer and sometimes I'm a doctor. That said, it was fascinating to see the engineers so hell-bent on saying, no, this thing works. It's okay. We can take body scans now, much better than an x-ray. Let's just go to market. And they were actually thinking we would lie on this slab like you were in an autopsy and hold still. And they thought, this is done. You know, it was engineered. It worked. The science worked. The medicine worked. But there was no human factor. And Chuck and I worked on focusing on the patient's comfort, their level of fear. You know, you're going through this test to find out if you have cancer. This is a project that has to be holistic in nature, and only design thinking can drive that solution. And that's what we did. So if you ever go in for an MRI or any kind of a CAT scan, and you rest your head on a nicely designed headrest, and you're nice and comfortable with the way the palette is designed, you can thank Chuck and me, because that's what we fought for.
That's a remarkable story. I mean,
Thank you, Patty.
People are going into this to try to find out whether they're going to die or not, and they put them on a slab like they're in a morgue.
Yeah, and now picture it's your child.
All right.
Your little one.
All right.
Is they're trying to diagnose what's wrong with your child who's 2, a child who can't really discuss their symptoms, or they're just saying, "Daddy, it hurts," and you're at St. Jude's Hospital now, and this is what I get to do. This is probably one of my favorite areas of influence, is helping the people who can't speak for themselves, and working in pediatric medicine is. It drains me like nothing drains me. I sob all night long, but then the next morning I go out there again, because there's nothing happier than that moment when you realize the child is doing diagnostic testing, and it's all because of the design, that they're actually smiling and laughing and they're not afraid.
Thank you, Patty.
We have other questions, and I know we do, but you have some of you have Joey syndrome, and you sit there an introvert.
Joey's the smartest person of the 4 of us. Are you kidding? I hire a Joey first and foremost, only because I need the polar opposite of me. So Joey, well done you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kim, I'm happy to help out. If anyone has a question, you can raise your hand, and then
I do have a question, actually.
I can monitor that. Go ahead. I heard someone. I don't know.
That was me. Yes.
Yeah, Kachi, go ahead.
I would like to ask a question just in general, because there's been a lot of talks about empathy and so forth. But one question I've had in general, and I've dealt with this in my own internship, how do you deal with being empathetic for someone and getting that back and forth with someone who inherently will try to undermine your position in order to elevate their own stance when it comes to designs, or just in general social conversations? Because I've actually dealt with one or two people, actually 2 people in my mind, who at times will like try to bring down someone else's opinion in that kind of like high school type way in order to elevate their own stance. How do you deal with that? Because it's not really a matter of like a design discussion where you're saying like yes but it's more you're trying to bring up your opinions and they're saying like reject it, and then they move on. How do you deal with that? Have you had experience where you had to deal with that in the earlier stages of your career? Because when you're just starting out, you want to like be on everyone's good side. You don't want to like create any sort of like strong opinions that may domino your way. How do you deal with that in general?
Yeah, so I would say for me, I mean, something like that would not happen on my team, you know, the teams that I build, because, you know, it's just unacceptable.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's now. I think earlier in my career, when something like that would happen, again, it goes back to the one-to-ones, you know, pull the person aside and just be direct, you know, and just, it's about communication. You know, you got to express your feelings. It's never good to hold anything in. You know, and if that doesn't work, then, I mean, there's other ways around that.
That's such a good point. It seems so like such a small thing, but sometimes I think the phrase is ask for what you need. Sometimes you're going to get it, but if you don't ask, pretty sure it'll never happen.
Yeah, because and I've done that before earlier in my career where I've had to, schedule a meeting with a person or two and, say, hey, I didn't appreciate you talking over me or questioning, this or that, or it made me look vulnerable or, whatever it may be, whatever the dynamic is, it's the best thing is to go right to the source, my opinion, to try to nip it in the bud.
If I could kind of pile on to what Joey's saying a little bit, Akachi, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. All right, thanks. I agree with what Joey said in the sense that the way you may be experiencing it, I don't know your exact circumstances. It's unlikely that I would never say that personal bias and kind of attacks, either overt or veiled, won't happen professionally. They absolutely will. They won't be perceivable as personal. That might be the difference, right? Like it'll be a lot more discreet. But one of the things that I think we talked about earlier is a really powerful tool here. I think there's two things that I could suggest or offer. Well, three things, but the third one's kind of nuclear. The first one is truly like almost, this sounds kind of silly, but like almost like a Zen thing, which is push back into them. And I don't mean to resist them, but like keep digging, like actually go the opposite direction you think you want to go and say, all right, well, help me better understand your criticism. Like keep making them elaborate to the point where if it's going to be obvious to the rest of the people around, if it's a multi-person situation, about whether there's credibility in what they're saying or whether there's bias in what they're saying. And if you keep digging, that's going to come out. And even like, you know what I'm saying? Like if they say, well, I don't like your project because of X, Y, and Z, I will say more about that and make them elaborate and make them get to the point where there's either substance to what they're saying or there's not substance, but that's like, you're going to put them in a situation where if they open their mouths, they better have something of substance to share, or they should probably reconsider doing it. Another option, which is not nuclear, but it kind of moves more in that direction, is just to be polite and then move on, which is to go, okay, thank you very much. I'll take that under advisement, and then just shut off. Like, don't allow it to manifest any more than it already has, but don't overly acknowledge it either. You acknowledge it enough to basically let that person feel like they've, so on one extreme, the first example I gave is you're really, really making that person feel heard. The second example is basically, I'm not going to get into this with you because this is grandstanding or whatever, and you just kind of politely shut it down. And the third option is you basically just straight up move on. Like you just don't even, you can go in other ways, but I'm with Joey. I think your first path has got to be to try to establish, like, I'm not exaggerating when I say I've had circumstances like that over the last 2 to 3 months where I had somebody, it wasn't personal, but somebody who I have a great rapport with in one of these meetings, he kind of cold cocked me with something that we had a different agreement on. And, in this room with executives, he basically put me in a hole. And it wasn't personal. It was just, he didn't like the way it was going. And I did exactly like what Joey said. I pulled him off to the side. I'm like, hey man, what's going on there? Like, what's on your mind? What was that all about? And we worked it out kind of offline. But the idea was to not engage in that multi-person conversation about that in that moment, because all you're doing is putting gas on a fire if you're doing that. And he and I spent probably 20 minutes after the meeting talking about it. And he actually, unsolicited, I wasn't looking for an apology, but he actually left that meeting saying, I had no idea I was putting you in that spot. I'm really sorry about that. And next conversation, he actually came back on what he said.
Yeah, and I think you'll find that with those kind of tough conversations or crucial conversations, is that if you're able to work through it in a healthy way, those relationships can actually become like some of your strongest. with some people, because you work past, some challenges, and all of a sudden you find yourself being friends with that person, which is a really good thing.
Yeah, it's that whole dating thing. It's like a Clark Gable movie. They start out arguing in the beginning, and then you fall in love, and you're the best friends forever. And actually, I'm making a joke, but that's actually very true, because you engage that person at a very personal level. So if you resolve those issues, and I really like Paul's suggestion there about asking questions, because it's sort of like corporate Aikido. If you go head to head, if you give them resistance, then they've got a target to go after. If you're just asking them questions, you're giving them a platform, you're forcing them to think through the process, you're forcing them to state the things that when they say it, all of a sudden it sounds a little absurd. And other people in the room can then engage in the conversation. It's just a really healthy way to go.
And if there is legitimacy to their point, you're also letting them be heard, which is often what people really want. So there's that as well.
It's so important for everyone.
And I would go a step further and actually take one step lower level, right? Let's just look at taking credit for what you do, right? You work in a company, there are going to be times when someone else takes credit, right? And it's just the way it is, right? I mean, it's human nature. You're trying to, do something or move yourself up the rung. You're going to run into people like that, right? One of the best ways to combat that is to lead with a positive attitude and cross collaborate as much as possible. So when that person goes somewhere else and says something, the person they're talking to, you've already spoke to, and they might know you, and they might say, well, that sounds like their idea, or something they would say, right? So I'm not saying be shady about it, but network. And if you're networking, people know more what you're about, and it gets harder for people to take your ideas, or take credit for your ideas, I should say.
And Jeff's just pointed out something that's so essential, and I'm not sure we're teaching it well, but document everything. You have to keep a paper trail every single day, not just your timesheet. Write down notes on what you did, what you accomplished, save sketches, save the simplest of sketches, date everything. Because I have been at the center of some HR and lawsuit situations where people in very large companies have stolen ideas from people like you and me, Akachi. And I'm not going to lie to you, there's a lot of trouble out there. For any of us to have to go through the agony of being dismissed because of the color of our skin, or our gender, or our religion, or our physical or mental capacity, that's unacceptable in a civilized culture, but we do not live in a civilized culture. I'm not sure we ever have. We know from archaeology that the tribe from one side of the valley came over and took our cave because it was better than their cave. This has been going on for millennia. So you have to document. And then I go to the Obama's playbook. If someone is treating you ill, if they're being unkind, if they're being cruel, if they're stealing your ideas at work, for heaven's sake, you just have to rise high. You really do. You can't meet hate with hate. It's not going to end well. So you just have to keep putting the love out there, keep living your best life, keep being your best person, do everything by the book, and always make sure if there is HR. When I started out, there was no HR. I had to figure out a lot of this stuff by myself. But I assure you that as Jeff was just painting this picture of building your team, your assets, it reminds me literally of what Jim Kelly faced with the Bills. There was great racial animosity on the Buffalo Bills when Jim Kelly was quarterback. And he started having the team over for dinner. And he forced them to see each other as people. And he got rid of a lot of that hatred, and that became a very tight family. That's the kind of work we have to do. And you might say, well, that's not the job of a designer. Yes, it is. I really think it is. We are designing the human experience in everything we do. And sadly, sweetheart, you've got to be ready for some situations where you're going to have to walk away because you can't fix the hate. And even living your best example, being your best, isn't going to be demonstrative enough to change a hater's mind. And that's where we are right now. But I think we have to put it out there. I think we have to talk about it openly, because that's the only way it goes away. Right now, we're living with the result of having swept all this under the rug. And now it's out front and center for all of us to deal with. There are still people that are viewed as minorities in business that are paid less than someone else. It goes on all the time. I have found out that I was given less as a consultant on a project than a colleague because that colleague told me, and then that got repaired later on. Kip Stevens was hired a year later than I was at Lowy, and he got $5,000 more than I did when he was hired. And when I found out about it, I went into my vice president and I said, I understand we have to adjust my salary. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't pitch a fit. I just remember looking at my VP who went ashen and said, what figure did you have in mind? And I took 10,000 more. So you have to play your best game. You have to be your best person, but don't hurt back. Don't hurt people who are hurting you. It won't serve you well in life at all.
So sometimes ask for what you need and you might just get it, right?
You have to ask for what you need. You might not get it, but if you don't ask for it, people aren't going to read your mind. Does that help? I hope it helps.
Yeah, it really does. Like, well, luckily the situation at the time wasn't racial, but at least I hope it wasn't.
Yeah, exactly.
It definitely does help, because I know that when you go out, you're going to deal with a lot of different people in a lot of different ways, and you want to be empathetic for others, but you also need to learn how to play, like, I don't know, I think the best way to say it is like the office culture, not all the things that are so inherently out in the open, but are more subliminal and more, in a way, more insidious. So it does help to know and like be aware to figure out how to deal with those ways that allow open and more empathetic conversation, but at the same time also doesn't outwardly come out like too much, because it's like a hidden conversation and hidden culture. Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. And I think not just your generation, all of us have to be aware that this is an issue, and it's something we deal with, all of us. But here we go back to kindergarten. Just hold hands with your friends and stick together, and it's going to be okay. We're going to make it okay. Yeah. And emphasis on the making.
Before you hold hands, Kachi, always ask first, okay?
Yes, well, that is, of course, the new dimension of what we have. You know, let me just remind everybody, I am the result of the first graduating class of industrial design from RIT. Wow. My faculty was from Syracuse University, which I think is why Syracuse University honored me with a doctorate, because they claim me as their own, since I was technically taught by Syracuse professors. But I'm a very proud RIT graduate, and I participate as much as I do with RIT at any opportunity, because I believe in how this entity is working, how it's teaching us, how it's schooling us, how it's helping us build a better world. I'm very proud of the education I got at RIT and continue to get, because you're educating me today. All of you as students educated me on Monday. Our conversation is about growth. Our conversation is the design of life.
Okay, I have actually a couple more questions, but we're a little short on time, so I'm going to do a little mashup here. And it's basically the future of design. So, and you can choose to answer whatever aspect of these questions, question you want. But basically, I'd like to share with the students what you see as what will the field of design be, or what should it be in the next 8 to 10 years? How are things going to change? When most of us, except Joey, the young kid here, when I was going to school at RIT, I remember when CAD was being first introduced, and solid modeling became a thing. And I remember when designers from GE showed up to help us with a project, and they brought colored copies of marker renderings. It was like they were from the future. And I remember hearing about the first ray tracing done in a lab at MIT. And by the time I graduated, you could buy this software for $300. It's just remarkable. And then seeing 3D printing and all these things and how that changed the design process. And there's always this thinking for every generation that we are at the pinnacle of technology and design process and manufacturing, but it's never true. So from a standpoint of technology, and I'm going to hand that one off to you, Jeff, what is that technology going to look like, and what is how's it going to change the design process, the deliverables? Because I know that you are in the heart of technology development for designers there at Autodesk. So you know what the future looks like, but as much as you can tell us, what do you think is going to happen?
You've probably already seen a little bit of it, and Paul already knows what it is because he's using it, right? So generative design is going to change everything. And it's an infant right now, but it's a 900-pound gorilla that is going to reframe how we design, how we think, and how we manufacture, because it is officially answering the promise of computer-aided design. CAD is just a tool, and you're driving it, just like a T-square or triangle. Generative design is you working with the computer, working with the intelligence, telling it materials, telling it manufacturing methodology, and it is yielding the geometry to best optimize material usage, manufacturing time, to hit the stress of the engineering equation. It's going to reduce material usage, it's going to reduce cost, it's going to reduce shipping, you name it, and we can't stop it, right? I don't want to say it's the Terminator, but as designers, we can work with the intelligence, and we can frame and collaborate the questions. So it's asking the right questions. If I was an engineer right now, I'd be really nervous. But since we're designers, we see a bigger picture. And I really look at it as collaboration. It's going to change everything.
Outstanding. Okay. Let's take this a little more to the human side, and what are going to be the main drivers for design, and if design has the opportunity to become a bigger part of framing the problem, where does that take us? Hopefully it's not still 99% driven by profits for the corporation, that there is more focus on the human need. And I had a sub question for you, Patty, is if you took corporations, and I'm gonna preface this with I'm going to assume you're familiar with Carolyn Credo Perez.
Mm-hmm.
And which is going to be a part, those of you in my human factors class, that is going to be subject of one of the lectures. She talks about the impact of design that up till this point and at this time assumes male as being the default human, and the horrible impact that has had for women in the workplace, in the home, in the health field, etc. So if say some of these large corporations were, for example, if you had the opportunity to have the magic wand and you swapped out every male in the organization for an equally technically skilled female and switched out every male for female, how would that landscape change? How would the world of design look differently?
So are you asking if gender was the lead variable? Is that what you're
If you were,
I'm not sure.
if women were more running the show, how would things look differently?
Well, I think we all know that. We wouldn't have war. Anyone that births a baby wouldn't allow it to be killed on a battlefield. No, and I say that as a proud Amazonian. That is unfortunately not, I think, the issue at hand. As a humanist, I would argue that what I think is going to happen in design is it's going to become more humane. As we are racing along with all the AI, which I embrace and applaud, we're going to also have to manage and balance the human factor. Right now in medicine, that's probably the thing we're witnessing most definitely. Nurses and doctors holding your loved one as they die in this pandemic because it's unsafe for you to hold them in that hospital. So this is where things are completely out of kilter. Throughout the whole pandemic, all I've seen is opportunities for design. And I think the bad results that we have in mismanaging the pandemic have been because we didn't have enough design going into the pandemic. You know, we never should have nurses who can't be protected in their work. So design is going to get more political. It's going to get more humanistic as it gets more scientific and technical. I loved the side-by-side, you know, Mr. Lowy's favorite projects were for NASA. But when you look at Mr. Lowy in his spacesuit, you know, from the Mercury program, and then you look at what Elon's guys are wearing in space, I mean, it's embarrassing. It's like, you know, the belle of the ball and someone who's, you know, made their own Halloween costume. So design really makes a very positive imprint on the experience. And so design's only going to get stronger. I will argue, I think we've got to also look at the legality of design. And I think we're going to be looking at a future where we're licensed.
All right. And last question for
Can we have a question from a student?
Yes.
Gates? Andrew?
Hi, everyone. I just want to say I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to provide this insight for us. But something I don't think I've really heard yet is about the future of sustainability in design and the importance of that coming into the future, you know, by, you know, U.S. has re-entered the Paris Accords recently, thank goodness. And I was just wondering, what kind of direction do you think design should be taking in terms of a green perspective and not only with humans at the center, but with the world as a living, breathing entity in this kind of situation?
I can weigh in if I don't know that it's going to be the most satisfying answer, but I can tell you at least based on what I've seen and what we project. So I wouldn't say that we're at the pinnacle of sustainability at Crown, but it's definitely, I think we're well above average is the way I would put it. We actually had people whose sole reason for being in the company was to look at our sustainability modeling, looking at total life cycle analysis of different products as a starting point and moving on from there. The promising things, I'll get to the nature of what the role of design can be in that, but just to kind of give some backdrop to that is, I think I mentioned this to some folks in the Q&A of my talk yesterday, that if you're doing business in Europe, you already need to be thinking about this because the EU is requiring it. So, for example, if you're going to sell a product in Europe, you have to be able to basically fill out a form that says that you care about this and in a substantive, measurable way. And that's very meaningful. So here's the thing that you probably don't want to hear, but I think it actually is, it's a true and legitimate answer to your question. Is it goes back to you. If you just simply say that this matters and somebody else says something else matters more, you're in a situation where you're going to have a winner and a loser. And I don't think that's a good position. if you can talk about sustainability as having other metrics of value to other people with other currencies, I think you're going to have a much bigger chance of success. So for example, one of the sustainability initiatives we did at Crown most recently, is just a very small example, but we think it's more of a trend, was looking at the way we package some of the vehicles for shipment and doing it in a more sustainable way. And there was a lot of resistance because it was more expensive and everything else. Well, once we actually did some homework and looked at what it was going to look like financially in the ecosystem, we were actually able to prove that this was a more cost viable answer than anything else we had been doing. And the millisecond we could say that, it completely changes the tone of the conversation. So there are times and situations where it's just not there yet. But I think it's going to have to be, if you just want to go into a room and yell about the importance of sustainability, you'll probably convert some people, but you won't convert anybody, and you'll actually polarize some people away from you. If you do it incrementally over time with a win here and a win there, over time, what you'll find is it will just happen. And it will happen the right way, and it will happen in a, pardon the choice of words, but it will happen in a sustainable way. So it will become part of practice, and people won't really even question it. They'll just do it because it's the right thing to do. So I think that's what I would suggest is the future there.
So just to add to what Paul is saying, I agree completely. I can say it, at HP and all like other places I work, Steelcase, and, it's, the initiatives are there, but, we have to prove it out. We have to, that's the ask. It's like, well, that sounds great and all. Of course, everyone wants to save the planet, but prove it, make it work for the business. And in my honest opinion, I think for that to work, in the long term, I think it's just going to be too late. I think this kind of stuff needs to be enforced. I think it's got to be like a make or break situation where it's like, because that's where we're headed. I mean, bottom line, companies are just so greedy. Humans are greedy.
I think
it's just the way it is. So this has to be enforced.
Joe, I think if I can build on both you guys, I think it's two levels. I think we have to look at it from the company standpoint, and we also have to look at it on the personal standpoint. Because if everyone takes an action on a personal level, that's even more impactful. If we can get everyone to think a little bit, and if it's me and I ride my bike to get a couple groceries, instead of taking my car, I've done something and I've made myself fitter, right? So that's a double win, right? On the company standpoint, right? You look at what, I saw a presentation by Herman Miller, engineer, many years ago, an IDSA presentation. And he was talking about all the problems with the Aeron chair. And I'm like, what do you mean? I have one. That's wonderful. And he's like, yeah, it's great, right? But it's got, complex composite materials. You can't take it apart, right? It's got to, it takes 40 minutes to take one apart, and you can't reuse half of it, right? That's why they designed the Mira chair, right? The Mira chair is just as comfortable, but the materials are single resin. You can throw it in a chipper, takes a screwdriver and 12 minutes of time, and you've disassembled the thing, and you can reuse like 70% of it, right? So those are things that companies can put in. And to Paul's point, if you can make the case and say, look, they're going to give us free raw material back if we get them to send us back to us, you just save money. Well, and to Joey's point, for the greedy company, you just gave them a pathway to save money, right? So how do you frame it in that way? To use what they look at as advantages as your advantage.
Totally agree. Actually,
and you always have to edify and educate. The first Earth Day was when I was a freshman, 1970. We were really passionate about this, and then it sort of waned away. But I have total faith that we're going to get some progress day by day. I look at Bernie Sanders and his recycled plastic mittens. You know, you have to get a popular message out for people to understand and believe. And when we've had far too long people saying this is all mythology and nothing's wrong with the planet, it takes a lot of edification to correct for that. So that's also why I say design has to get very political.
Yeah, I mean, if in reality, I realize it's not limited to this, but your three best chances of it becoming a big deal were covered here, in my opinion, right? My politics have even shifted on some of these matters to kind of more what Joey said, which is you can legislate it, which, you know, you can argue, like I used to be like, well, you know, you don't want to legislate that stuff, but here's the reality. You often need legislation because the ethical nature of things cannot be counted on to do the right thing every time. Okay, so the interesting part is if you look over history and when legislation has been created, like as a car guy, I'll give you an example, right? In the 70s, they created the CAFE standards that required that car makers produce cars with an incrementally harder and harder fuel standard. And the car maker said, this is impossible. We'll never do this. Yeah, they did. They figured it out. They do it. And because they had a gun to their head and were told to do it, and they figured it out. So legislation works. What Patty said is another one, which is that basically you have to get to social critical mass that compels companies to have to hit customers where they want to be hit, right? But you got to get to a level of critical mass. And the third option is just make it good business economically. And all three of these are viable. But I'll give you an example of one that we're actively struggling with, right? Amazon is one of our biggest customers. And I don't need to tell those of you that worry about this topic about what a mess Amazon can make. Okay. But the interesting part is, you know, we have a lot of conversation. The funny part is Amazon buys trucks from us. This really shouldn't even be part of our concern for Amazon, but we have e-commerce conversations within the design group, and I lead those conversations. And the biggest thing we talk about is, you know, this is not a sustainable, friendly thing we've created. Okay, no, we didn't create it, but the way people are consuming. But the biggest issue with that, and sorry, this is a long answer to your question, Kates, but the pandemic has actually created one problem in like e-commerce as an example, right? Like, you know, the packaging is horrible. I literally sometimes have 3 trucks show up at my house at the same day. 3 trucks. Why 3 trucks? Why not 1? I know why, but that's horrible. And here's why, because on the scales of sustainability versus the desire to have something when I want it, where I want it, and how I want it, sustainability loses for most people. It kind of gets back to Patty's point. So what we're trying to do is, and Amazon knows this, and Amazon wants to keep making money. So what we're trying to do is have different conversations with them about, well, why do you have 3 trucks going to somebody's house? Isn't that just expensive? We know it's a sustainable improvement, but we're trying to pivot the nature of the conversation to the currency that matters to them. Like, can't you just, and actually I was on my phone earlier today where now they're starting to release initiatives. It's like, hey, I'll reduce your shipping cost if you just say that I will deliver everything to your house on 1 day a week. And that's going to save cardboard. That's going to save air, you know, everything on the sustainability model. But even people that want sustainability are often not willing to pay the personal price for it. If, like, okay, you're used to having something at your house 24 to 48 hours after you hit the buy it now button. Okay. Are you willing to wait 2 weeks? Are you willing to wait 6 to 8 weeks? There's going to have to be a level of personal sacrifice or legislation or economic benefit.
All of the above, right, Paul?
Ideally, all the above,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so let me close out by saying this is we've sort of come full circle in that we're taking a look at some of the biggest problems on the planet, right? And that can be a little bit overwhelming, daunting. But the positive in this is, as industrial designers, you will be in some of the best positions to have the most influence to redirect the narrative, the thinking. And And just as you try to use empathy and candor, communication skills to sway somebody in a meeting, you also have a lot of influence over how the public thinks about things and how people see things, and making suggestions on what materials get used, where the material sources are. There's nobody in the product development process that touches all aspects of product development like the industrial designer. You are the only ones that are involved in product function, aesthetics, manufacturing, ergonomics, and contact with the marketing people, the business people. And you have a lot to say how people perceive products in how you put the product out there. And yes, legislation is a good thing, but the legislators have to be on board. The legislators get on board if their constituents are on board. If the constituents want to see more environmentally responsible, if the they can convince their legislators to do that. If the population understands that they don't want to see their friends, family die of the pandemic, they don't want to see forest fires destroying the West Coast. If they understand that the connection between that and our decisions in products, or the product we use, or the impacts these products have on the environment, whether social or physical environment, educating them is a huge part of what we do with every product we make. Every decision we make in the product development process has some sort of an impact, so that you can start a different narrative or strengthen a narrative that you think has more value.
And
You will be in a position to have great impact on that.
don't forget that everyone on this call is a consumer, and we all buy and we all use. So you can lead by other examples and take a designerly approach when you buy something. Don't just buy the $200 couch that's, going to need to be replaced in 3 years. My lounge chair that's in my house is never leaving. So buy good things and vote with your dollars too. You don't buy knockoff product, right? Buy designer product. There's a reason. If we can't buy designer pieces and we don't support good design, then why should somebody else, right? So vote with your dollars too.
Okay, so we are at the more than top of the hour. Kim, thank you for leading such a wonderful discussion. I love how things went full circle and really ended with a call of action and the question for the impact that we all have as designers. Our facilitators, we owe so much to you. It's been a wonderful week. Thank you for making us think and for inspire us in so many directions. I wish we could do this again next week, but I will give you a longer break before we reach out again. You've been wonderful, and thank you all, for participating this week. To our students, best of luck with the new semester. We hope that this inspired and energized you. For what's coming ahead of us. I'm sure it's going to be very exciting and meaningful as always. So thank you again. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you later.